So we're just going to talk today about Rodney's case, and we have in town Wana Akpan and Rodrick Reed, who can talk a bit more about the activism that they've been doing and their experiences over many years in the last few months advocating for Rodney. So by way of introduction, I'm Bryce Benjet. I'm a senior staff attorney at the Innocence Project, and I've been representing Rodney since 2002. And at that time, I was with an organization called the Texas Defender Service, which represents folks on death row. And we took Rodney's case and really worked it up from scratch in many ways. And over the years, as we've worked on this case, more and more has come to light that continues to corroborate everything that Rodney's told us about his innocence and continues to implicate who the police initially suspected in the case, which was the victim's fiance, Jimmy Finnell. And so we're not going to talk much about the specifics of this case, and I think the various websites that we're on have great overviews of the facts. And really what we want to do is spend this time with Rodrick and Wana and talk to them about their experiences.
Okay.
So if folks out in the audience have questions that for Rodrick and Wana, please feel free to submit those, and we've got somebody who's monitoring that hopefully certain questions can get asked, and as well as the audience here at the Innocence Project. I'll get it started, and so for Rodrick and Wana, really, the last few weeks have been obviously, kind of, I think we were talking about it like a whirlwind in a lot of ways.
Yes, it has.
How has sort of the community support played into your work and your feelings about this?
Well, the community has really come together. I'm talking in the beginning, we didn't have no church leaders, or anybody with us, but now they have stepped up, come together, and it has been very, very phenomenal. It's been great. They've been supporting us in a lot of different ways, financially to sustain our trip and everything else, and the support has been overwhelming.
And publicly supporting, I think, is also really important too. There have been, in the recent months, like different clergy and churches that have, behind the scenes voiced their support, but there was the pastor conference that happened, not too long before Rodney was scheduled to be executed, and that was probably the biggest display of community support from the clergy side. Also, Reverend Byron Green out of Elgin, he's really stepped up when it comes to the Bastrop County churches, but it's, from what Rodrick and his mom told me, like, the community support has just been growing overwhelmingly.
Yeah, and so Rodrick, can you kind of describe how long you've been sort of doing this advocacy for your brother and kind of how that has developed?
Well, I've been supporting my brother from day one because I know and believe in his innocence, and in the beginning we had very few supporters because there was not as much evidence out there as there is today. And so over the years, we've been crying out, screaming, yelling, everything we could do to get attention to Rodney's case, and it's been slow going. But over the years it has developed, and we have developed a great following, and people have been from all over the world have been showing their support, and especially here in the past few months, it's been overwhelming. People have been coming forward, all walks, religions, everything, just been coming forward and just supporting us, and financially, mentally, spiritually, everything.
Yeah, and Wana, how did you kind of get involved in all of it?
When I was in AmeriCorps, so with the AmeriCorps program, there's this annual Martin Luther King March that happens every year, and AmeriCorps members are invited to be a part of it. And at the time, 2015, when Rodney had that March 5th, 2015 execution date, there was a table. So fast to kind of like shorten it. So at the MLK March, there's like a after celebration that happens after the march. That's at Houston-Tilson. And when I went to the after celebration march, the first table that I saw was, I believe it was the Texas Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty. I think they probably were collaborating with other organizations. They had like flyers about a conference that was coming up, and there was a woman who spoke to me about Rodney's case. And what really drew my attention to what she was saying was the fact that there was DNA that hadn't been tested in Rodney's case that could prove his innocence, namely the murder weapon. And I thought that was crazy. Y'all are scheduling to execute someone in 2 months and you haven't even tested the murder weapon. And that's when, I didn't know if Rodney was guilty or innocent, but I was like, that right there is pretty ridiculous to me. I want to learn more. And I went to different meetings and stuff like that and became more and more convinced with each meeting that I went to that Rodney was innocent of the murder of Stacey Stites, and I've been involved ever since.
And so, Rodrick, you described how this kind of support, grew over the years. What were some of the challenges that you faced kind of getting attention to Rodney's case?
Some of the challenges that we faced was basically just getting the truth out there, just getting people to listen to us, to trying to get people to understand that Rodney and Stacey was in a relationship. A lot of people was listening to what the prosecution was putting out there, the propaganda that they were putting out there, and they wasn't listening to the actual truth. They wasn't even looking at the actual facts, and those were some very tough challenges that we faced trying to get the truth out there.
Yeah. And sort of in those early days, because I remember, this has really been, from my observation, I'd love to kind of hear you talk about it, kind of really a family effort, right? And
yes.
How has this whole thing kind of affected your family?
Well, in the beginning, my mom, Sandra, who is the head of Reed Justice Initiative, she led the way for many years. She was the vocal person of this family, and she and the rest of our family have always stood behind Rodney's innocence, and we've always tried at every venue, every time we had a chance, we were there with bells on to tell this story. And so just going from that, and building over the years, and as time went on, my mother, she started to, just life and age and everything started to affect her. So I had to take some of that burden up off of my mom, you know what I mean? And so I stepped forward and took those reins, and we've been moving ever since. And she still advocates for Rodney to this day, every chance she gets, but she just don't travel as much anymore.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, so, but.
And, and I know your father passed a few years ago.
Yes.
Well, what kind of, how was he with all of this?
My father was a big supporter of Rodney's. Like I said, the whole family was. And last thing my father told me was to take care of my mother and to continue to advocate for Rodney to keep doing what I was doing. And I promised him that I would, and that I would not stop until Rodney comes home. And so here I am today.
Yeah. So I remember when when I was a little bit younger than I am today, being at a rally out in Austin, out by the mayor's office, and my kids were probably 3 and 5 years old maybe, and running around and what's it like having your little boy RJ is what, 3.5 now, and I know he's been in a lot of the photos and media. What's it like to kind of be working on a campaign like this and raising a little boy and having him part of that? I'll ask you both. But,
yeah, I'm really proud of RJ. Like, he's a really sharp child. He picks up on a lot of stuff, and we're basically providing the tools and the upbringing for him to be an activist if he chooses to do that, and he's just soaking it all in. Even at the age of 3, you know, we've been involving him since the very beginning, and you know, it does get kind of tough sometimes, especially he is really young and he has a lot of energy and he runs around and, you know, is doing what 3-year-olds do at that age and stuff, but given the gravity of what we're doing, sometimes it can be a little stressful at times trying to tend to him at the same time doing the campaigns that we do for Rodney, but he's a very important piece of what we do. You know, people love to see him, you know, see him at our events and stuff and see him in the pictures, so we're blessed to have him, but it does get tough at times.
You know, I have a little story about that. You know, we go out, we yell these chants and stuff all the time, and one of his favorites is no justice, no peace. So one day we had just came from HEB and we had bought a box of popsicles. And he was looking at those popsicles sitting on the counter, and he looked at it and he said, no popsicles, no peace. No popsicles, no peace. And so that lets me know that he's grasping the concept. If I don't get no popsicle, y'all ain't gonna have no peace.
Yeah.
And so that lets me know that he's really paying attention and he's getting the meaning of this, you know.
No, and I know that picture of y'all and him out in front of the Supreme Court, I found real inspiring, and I think it really kind of shows the family connection here. So, have y'all had a chance to visit Rodney since this day of execution?
Yes, I have. I visited him right before Thanksgiving. We sat down, we had a visit with him. We was going to go that Monday before Thanksgiving, but he was in the hospital, lower intestinal problems and stuff. And so that Tuesday we went and we visited with him. He was in high spirits, he was feeling good, a little sore, but he was feeling good, and he was just happy and proud of the work that we all were doing, you know, and he was just talking about, you know, the different stars, the different people that got involved and everything, and he was just really seemed like he was on the cloud, you know what I mean? Because hey, he's still here, and we still got this chance, and that just did everything. And he told me, he said, man, I made you the general out there, and you've done above and beyond everything that I asked you to do. You even done stuff I asked you not to do, which later off paid off, you know what I mean? Because he don't like me to travel that much, but yeah.
He also he emphasized just thanking all of his supporters, like everybody. Like he said himself, you know, he considers everyone who's helping to save his life and to prove his innocence to be part of his family. And he loves and appreciates everybody. He said he wants to give everyone that's been, you know, part of his family or being added to his family a hug. And I'm like, Rodney, there's like almost 3 million people. I don't know if it's 3 million at this point. People who signed the petition. That's a lot of embracing, you know.
Well, he's ready for it, you know what I mean?
Well, he's got big arms, so it's pretty good. So what's your, you know, this experience is obviously something, you know, how has this changed your, you know, in a lot of ways, has this changed the way you sort of see the world? Yeah.
It has. As I've stated this many times before, when we first got into it, our sole goal was to bring Rodney home. That's all that was on my mind, you know, and I had tunnel vision, but over the years, that vision began to broaden. I seen a bigger picture, you know what I mean? And I've seen that there are 1,000 other Rodney Reeds out there that's needing this type of help, this type of support, this type of voice. And the more the years went by, you know, I never agreed with the death penalty. I was always opposed to it, but the more it made me want to abolish it, do whatever I can to do to abolish the death penalty. So I prayed to God and I asked him, you know, what can I do? And he said, well, that's part of the path that I set you on, is to help abolish the death penalty. So I'm in this for life. I'm gonna do this until, you know, there's no longer a death penalty anywhere, you know what I mean? I'm gonna stand up for everybody, because I don't believe the right, federal or state, has the right to take any life of anybody, no matter their crime, innocent or guilty.
And Wana, has this had an effect on?
Definitely, in many different ways, but I would say the most significant is probably like when I first got involved with Rodney's case. I wasn't anti-death penalty. I felt in certain cases there's some people out there who deserve to be put to death for doing really heinous things. But just being involved with my family's fight for abolition and looking deeper into Rodney's case and seeing the prosecutorial misconduct, seeing evidence tampering, seeing all this injustice, all this corruption, all this racism, all this classism that goes into the death penalty, and it's absolutely wrong. And then also just as my faith has grown over time and everything, like, you know, I believe that, you know, no matter how heinous a crime someone has done, it's not the state or the in the case of federal executions, for the federal government to put people to death. Like, they're not, the government isn't God. That's not okay. But you know, especially in cases where there's a strong innocence claim, there are many. I mean, we only know so many of the people who are innocent and have been put to death. But there's so many more, most likely, you know, when you look into Rodney's case and you dig deeper. It's also, I'll also mention that too. Rodney's case has also encouraged me to look deeper, dig deeper. You know, the prosecution state may say one thing, but that doesn't also always make it the case, like, or yeah, it's not like these folks will do anything to keep their jobs, to protect their legacies and everything. You have to dig deeper. Don't be so quick to believe everything that the prosecution or the state says. Yeah. Yeah, so when it comes to that, and also my walk with the, and wanting to abolish the death penalty, I would say those are the most significant ones that come to mind.
So I think we have a couple of questions that have already come in, and obviously I know people can submit more, and we'll certainly take some from the audience, but here's one from Marmalade 1023, who says, I'm so glad Rodney has a family who loves him so much and stood by forever. I'm from a messed up family, so I appreciate y'all love from San Antonio. That's not a question, it's more of a comment. And here's another similar comment, but Stringham32, please tell Rodney that we are watching all the way from Michigan. He has support, and we demand justice for Rodney. And so hearing these things come in, you know, I mean, I see, you know, I've been to some of these where, you know, you're out in front of the DA's office and you got the bullhorn, and that's, you know, I'm kind of a dinosaur, but maybe that's kind of often what I think of when, you know, I think of protest and advocacy in a lot of ways. And how has your sort of approach or thought to advocating for Rodney changed over the years?
Well, I don't know how it actually really changed over the years, because I believe we've been doing the same thing we've been doing from day one. That's just telling the truth,
yeah.
Just getting it out there, you know. The only thing that really has changed here is since this last date that they've given him, I talked with my mom and my wife, and I said, well, we've been doing the same thing for the last 22 years and we've been getting the same results, so we got to do something different. And that's when I said, we got to take this thing across America. We got to go from LA to New York. I don't care what it takes. I know we don't have the money, we don't have the resources, but we got a voice and we can use that. We can ask people to help support us and guide us along the way, and we've done that. The Innocence Project, Journey of Hope, Death Penalty Action, a lot of groups have come forward and helped us, and we made that happen. We went from LA to New York telling my brother's story. So that's basically the only thing that's really changed, is just the places that we were telling the story.
Yeah, and Wana, what, in terms of all of this travel, and I know that you know, another way that I've seen these things amplify is obviously through social media and things like this.
Oh, yeah, well,
no, you and I are coming from the same place.
Yeah, dinosaur. Yeah, exactly.
You know, I mean, when I first started on this case, I was like, what's a web page?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, Wana, how has your approach kind of, or maybe you hadn't changed because you.
Involved fairly recently, but no, I would say, a few years ago, after Rodney and Rodrick had a conversation about, basically Rodney was encouraging Rodrick, saying, we have all these different, advocates and stuff like that, but the family can do something too. Y'all, this is before I was part of the family. Y'all can do this. Y'all can be doing the same thing. Y'all need to start something. And that's when, Reed Justice Initiative was in the, the beginning stages. And like Rodrick said, it started out with trying to free Rodney and also prove his innocence. But along the way, we were like, we also need to extend this to other families because God has blessed us with the gift of extensive high profile media attention. There's a lot of other people who don't have that same thing or whatever. And, as we move forward in our advocacy, right now we're not a nonprofit, but we want to move towards 501c3 status so we can start doing more, get more resources to be able to better advocate for other families who are, innocent on death row, wrongful conviction cases, but primarily wrongful conviction death penalty cases, but also advocating for people who are guilty and on death row too, because although we are the family members of someone who's innocent on death row, we know the pain of what it's like to have a family member on death row, and regardless of innocence or guilt, it's a painful thing to go through. So that's what we're trying to do, move forward in doing, growing our advocacy to other families and using our high profile media attention to help others, and Rodney at the same time.
Yeah, and speaking of that, she mentioned the wrongful prosecutions, and that's something that I really want to try to work on too, because right now, there's a lot of wrongful prosecutions happening right there in Texas. I know it's happening everywhere. And there's no accountability for these things. These people can overlook evidence, they can suppress evidence, they do all these crazy things, and at the end of the day, there's no consequences or repercussions. Nothing happens to them. They can go home to their family and their kids and nothing happens to them. Nobody says nothing, not even a slap on the hand. And they're putting people, giving them life sentences or death sentences. And some of these people are knowingly and willingly doing these things. I think that we should work towards something where we can hold these people accountable, to make them think twice before they try to suppress some evidence, before they try to just railroad somebody. That will slow a lot of this stuff down, I believe, and that's something that we're going to try to bring out into the limelight as well.
Using New York as a model, because New York right now is the only state that has like a prosecutorial misconduct commission or board or whatever, kind of using the model, and I know New York is still trying to iron out certain kinks or whatever with that commission, but we need something like that in Texas. We need something to hold these prosecutors accountable for when they, damage lives. Like, it's not okay that it's just chalked up to the fact that, that's just something that comes with the job, and they're able to just get away with that. It's not okay.
And so I know we're also speaking to the Dr. Phil's audience. What was it like, and what role did that Dr. Phil appearance play in all of your more recent efforts?
Well, you're talking about a loudspeaker. Well, that was like a bazooka or something. It was just loud. His voice was loud, and the world heard it. And I can't thank Dr. Phil enough, because a lot of people heard us, but they wasn't listening to us until Dr. Phil said the same things that we've been saying for the last 22 years, and that drew a lot of people to my brother's case. And I can't thank Dr. Phil enough for the work that he did, the outstanding job he did, both off the scene and behind the scene, using his own social platform. He's a godsend. He has answered our prayers over the many, many years, and it's just been a blessing, and blessings have followed ever since then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know that talking to a number of people who got interested or learned more about the case when those episodes, which were linked to the great work that Sean King was doing with you guys,
Yes.
And I mean, was that your experience as well? Is that collaboration of media and activism?
Yes, that collaboration, media and activism, it's what we needed. And it was at the perfect timing. It couldn't have been, sometimes we want what we want it right then, but it's not the right time. I believe everything worked out perfectly. I believe everything worked out perfectly, even though it took 22 years to get to that perfect spot. It worked out perfectly, and with all that media support, activism support from other activists, Dr. Phil, Kim Kardashian, how she called me personally on the phone, invited me to different functions and stuff, and just sat down and talked with me for a long time, about the work that she's doing and about how passionate she is about trying to see that my brother gets justice. You can't buy that kind of stuff, You can't buy that kind of stuff. That stuff is gifted from God, and that's the way I take it.
The fact that she even
Used her own social media platform where she has a bunch, millions of followers and everything, that in and of itself also helped Rodney's case to kind of explode in a favorable way. So
Everybody,
we were really thankful for that.
Meek Mill, everybody, LL Cool J, anybody that signed a petition, that donated $1, a cent, that just called the governor's office, that called Brian Gertz's office, everybody that had any part of this, we thank you from the bottom of our hearts. My mom thanks you from the bottom of my heart. Jason Flom, I could go on and on because it's just been so overwhelming. We had so many people just stepping up, to fill the gap, to fill the void, to bring Rodney home, and it's been unreal. And I don't think we have enough time for me to thank everybody. You know what I mean? Really.
I know for sure, and it did not just reach. We've got all of these celebrities. Gayle King, Oprah, but Beyonce. I've gotten hipper just from this experience. But as important, if not more so, are all the folks who are
individual.
The two representatives of Bastrop County, correct, in the Texas legislature.
Mm-hmm.
for the first time ever. So that was pretty awesome.
Democrats and Republicans.
Democrats and Republicans. And I want to space a special thanks to Deke Pierce, that the Williamson County constable that helped form the amicus letter, the amicus brief.
That was huge.
That was huge. That's never been done before. For them to see the injustice and
Cops calling out bad cops.
that was huge.
And that touched me very much, because this guy didn't know me from Adam. I met him
At the Anthony Graves.
At an Anthony Graves event, and he talked to me, and I talked to him about Rodney and everything, and he came to our event, and he was one of our first huge donors. He boom, off the hip, here you go, I'm gonna do everything I can. And he not only did he give monetarily, but he gave of his heart and his time. Something he didn't have to do. And that meant a lot to me as well.
Well, and just from the legal perspective, having a group of experienced law enforcement officers weighing in at the problems and the investigative missteps that led to this wrongful conviction is just invaluable. So,
Yes, it is. Yes.
So we've been talking a lot. Are there questions either from the audience or on the various social media that? Yeah.
Vanessa, this is for you, Bryce. Vanessa asks, how did you find out about Rodney's case?
That's a good question.
That is a good question, and it's been a long time. I know, so I know that we had been approached by a number of different people early on, and again, I think one was the NAACP folks, and I know I had been getting calls from just a number of people at the Texas Defender Service, because we're one of the few organizations at the time which had the expertise and the resources to actually provide good representation to people. And when we looked at that case, and it wasn't just me, it was Catherine Case and Morris Moon and Elizabeth Detweiler, who And what we saw was somewhat shocking at just the sort of obvious injustice that jumped out of the paper. And so even though we knew it was going to be a difficult task, and we were not a big organization, we didn't have, it was really just lawyers, but we decided to take it on, and we're able to get good scientists to volunteer their time, and we got the courts to pay for some of it, which was always good and constitutionally required. And we were able to work up the case, and so that's how that went.
And on the same, for you, Bryce, can you remind people where we are and when Rodney will have a new trial?
Sure. Obviously, the stay of execution was a huge event, but it should never have had to have happened. And we've seen this in Texas. The use of these execution dates is extremely disruptive to the practice and to the legal system. And what we've seen just this last year is roughly half of the dates that are set have been either withdrawn or stayed. So there's something wrong going on here. But in Rodney's case, we were able to develop new evidence and continue to press the forensic evidence that we've had for a number of years now. And finally, the Court of Criminal Appeals stayed the execution and has remanded us for an evidentiary hearing. That hearing is going to be broad in scope. It is all of the evidence of innocence, which is going to be the forensic evidence. It's going to be the evidence that shows that Rodney and Stacy were in a relationship. And it's going to be the evidence that implicates Jimmy Finnell, including his confession and his statements of knowledge of the relationship. So it's going to be a very broad hearing. We don't know much about the timing yet. There's a lot of legal work that goes into these, both procedurally and frankly just assembling all of these witnesses. So it's probably going to be several months before we're ready to proceed in court, I would, at a minimum.
Great. Karen asks, how is this, back to the family, you mentioned it before, but how has it affected everyone? If you can tell people again, how it's affected the Reed family and community.
Well, it has affected us from day one. It is, like I tell everybody, it's been a nightmare that we just can't seem to wake up from and see no end to. And it has changed the way I view a lot of things as far as the justice system. But I think sometimes bad things that have to happen in order to bring about a greater good. And this is a terrible thing that happened to my brother, but I believe that this is bringing out a greater good, not just in me, but other members of my family and members of the community. So it is changing for the better now. There's going to come a lot of good out of this, I do believe. So it's changing in all kinds of ways.
And can you share again, people are asking how Rodney's doing.
Rodney is doing great. He's in good spirits. He's healthy. Has, a lot of optimism about this upcoming hearing and everything else. So he's doing good. He's doing good. So.
And one thing that people don't really think about, which is when you get an execution date on death row, you get transferred to a special part of the prison.
Yeah.
Death watch. Yeah, it's called Death Watch, and I guess you've talked to him about it.
Yes.
What has he talked about in terms of that experience?
He says, just like you're under a microscope 24/7. You're constantly being watched. No lights. There's certain things privileges that you have on death row you don't have on death watch. There's a lot of things that they, it's just, it's more intense, and it's more stressful. And And it was real stressful for me, especially with him being on death watch and everything else, because he made me his agent. And that would be the person that oversees his body or anything that happens to him, his funeral arrangements and everything else. And that's a lot. You know, I'm his younger brother, and that's a lot for me to take in, knowing his innocence. And I'm going to have to be the one, God forbid, if anything happened to him, to carry these things out. And that is a load that nobody should have to bear on their shoulders, especially in the case of an innocent person. This has been a whirlwind, but wow, I don't know what else to say on that.
And so, Wana, you live in, you guys, I mean, you're relatively new to the community.
Yeah.
Rodrick, obviously, you've lived in Bastrop a long time.
Yes.
I mean, how do you think, if this had gone forward, what effect would that have had on the community?
Wow.
It would have been chaos. It would have been chaos, because I've had many people call me from all over, all different organizations, saying, man, you just give the word and we'll do whatever it takes, because we're not going to lay down, we're not going to take this. And I told them, I constantly stressed to everybody else, we're going to do this thing the right way. We're going to do this thing peaceful and everything else, you know. And they said, but what if something happens to your brother? I said, well, then something happens to my brother, I can't control what anybody else does. I can only control myself, you know what I mean? So I'm not going to condone nothing, but it is what it is. But I think if they would have succeeded in this, Bastrop would have been smoking right now, I think. I'm just telling the truth.
Well, you know, and I think
that's just my opinion.
That these executions are, you know, not just about the person who's being executed. I mean, exactly. And that, you know, I mean, I suspect that your family are not the only people in Bastrop who believe that Rodney didn't commit this crime.
The whole community now
A
is
large portion.
I'm talking. Every race, color, creed, everybody has shown support in Bastrop. People that I know to been racist has come to me and said, man, your brother is getting screwed. And it's a shame, you know what I mean? And I know them to be from a racist background, but they saw the injustice in this. They seen the cruelty and inhumane things that they were doing to my brother, and they were not in line with that. They didn't agree with that. And so, and the community has come together. Now I feel like a little small celebrity when I'm in town. Actually, I really do. Because people are always stopping me, man. Hey, man, you're doing a great job with your brother. And they ask me things about Rodney, and we seen you with this, we seen you with that, and you need to run for mayor, you need to run for city council, you need to do this. You know, like I told them, the only thing I can think about right now is getting my brother home. Yeah. That's, you know, getting him home and helping anybody else along the way that's in the like circumstance that he's in. I'm game for that. But any other thing, I can't see nothing past that. I got to concentrate on the meat on my plate right now, and that's get my brother home.
So, Wana, I mean, you guys have these great shirts. Tell me, obviously, they're. Tell us about them and tell us what these little boxes are.
Okay, yeah. So, yeah, sure. So there was this one picture that was of Rodney. He had like his hands clasped. I don't remember where the picture was from. And I used some type of program to vectorize the image and stuff and clean it up or whatever. And then that's the image that's on the shirt, and we've been using that for the majority of our shirts. As for the so the boxes are QR codes. This QR code goes to Psalm 64 in the Bible. It talks about how God is for the innocent, and then it talks about evildoers who are plotting injustice and talk negatively, I forget the exact wording, but basically use words that are like arrows to hurt this innocent person. And there's also the backstory with their grandmother, their big mama, who would make Rodrick read certain verses of the Bible repeatedly and in different types of ways, basically to illustrate the power of the word being the word of God, and how using the word of God can do magnificent wonders in your life. And when Rodney had the hearing back in October 2017, there was a woman who came to Rodrick, and I don't know if your mom was there, but I know Rodrick was saying, well, I'll let you tell the story of the woman who gave you the paper.
Anyway, there was a whole bunch of people in the crowd, and this lady I've never seen before, I don't know who she was, and she was a white lady, and she came to me and she had a piece of paper folded up, and she gave it to me, and she told me to read this, and this would help. And I opened it up and I saw what it was, and to my amazement, it was one of the Psalms that my grandmother would always have me read. And then, so it was like confirmation of what my grandmother used to tell me, you know, and to how to follow and how to fight against evil with the Word of God. And so that's why we incorporated it into these shirts. That's why we put that on there.
And then we have this one. This is Matthew 18, 19, 20. Basically, when people gather together in the name of Jesus, it will happen. So that's this QR code. This one is for, and excuse me, it's been a while since we've used these QR codes because just with everything that's been happening. But this one with Rodney's face in it, I believe it goes to a blog post that Rodrick had written about the experience of having Rodney be on death row, being innocent and everything, and basically how it was like a knife that is stuck in you in such a way that you can't remove it and it won't kill you, but you feel the pain of it, and basically how it's been feeling like he's been stuck with a knife, this particular knife, for the past 22.5 years. And also in this QR code, it has all the different documentaries that Rodney's case has been featured on. This one is the Innocence Project petition. And this one is our Facebook page, and I don't think, oh no, I have it on this one too. So yours is probably a better illustration of our, this is our Twitter and our Instagram.
Yeah. And we make these shirts ourselves. Reed, me and Wana, we make these shirts ourselves. We don't outsource them. We don't do that. We put our love into making these shirts, and when we sell them, sweat, tears, love, and blood sometimes. Yeah. So when you buy one of these shirts, you're getting a actual handmade shirt from the Reed family, and it's a way of supporting us, and it's also a way of getting Rodney's story out there, and just a way of us saying thank you at the same time. It's a mix of everything, but we make these ourselves. We haven't been in production of these shirts in a while because we've been on the road and everything, but once we get back here after the new year and everything settles down, we're going to start going back into production, start making a lot of shirts. So people, if you want shirts from the Reed family and support the Reed family, look to us at Reed Justice Initiative or Reed Justice Printworks, and you can get one of these shirts here after the new year.
So anybody in the room have questions?
Yes.
So you've talked about all of the injustices that your brothers experienced, and of course Rodney needs to come home, but what does justice in this case look like to you?
Justice in this case looks like getting the right person first and foremost that killed Stacey Stites. That's what justice looks like to me, because we know it's not my brother. We need to hold the right person accountable for this crime. And I'm not asking for no death penalty because we don't believe in the death penalty, but they need to be held accountable for. And that's what justice looks like. And bringing Rodney home and then get them to compensate him for his time, for his loss. You know what I mean? They can't undo all that, but they can compensate him, make it easier, because it's going to be a battle for my brother to adjust back out here. You know, he's been locked up for almost 23 years, 24 years, you know what I mean? And that's going to be a battle, but that's a battle I'm happy to face. I'm happy to wrestle with that one, you know what I mean? To have him home and work with that. But that's what justice looks like for me. Getting justice for Stacey Stites right there. And then also hold the prosecutors and everybody else accountable for the crimes in which they committed and convicting my brother, because they committed crimes.
Absolutely.
We just ain't proved it yet, but it's going to come out in the wash.
Everyone who had a role to play in Rodney being wrongfully convicted, I feel that's a major part of justice.
Yes,
prosecution,
be held accountable.
Law enforcement,
The
everyone,
whole cover-up, because it's been a big cover-up.
Public official who had, or government official who had a role in Rodney being on death row, and also sustaining him being on death row for so long needs to be held accountable.
That's part of justice.
You know, the one thing that, you know, working on these cases from a criminal defense background, you often are very, you know, necessarily focused on your client and the person who's in prison. But doing the work that we do at the Innocence Project, it really does bring to home the idea that wrongful convictions are not just about the person who is wrongfully convicted, because for every time that the wrong person is sent to prison, the person who actually committed that crime remains at large and frequently commits other crimes. And so that's you know, an important issue that I think everybody, regardless of what they think about certain issues with regard to punishment, needs to be aware of when it comes to getting the right person. And I think that that's one of the reasons why this has really resonated with a broad segment of people in Texas. You know, whether you're a conservative Republican or a liberal Democrat, everybody can agree that if we're going to put people in prison, if we're going to have the death penalty, we need to get the right person. And that's just a pretty simple, fundamental, and conservative value that that really, I think, is expressed in Rodney's case and in all of the cases where there are wrongful convictions.
I also believe that when wrongful convictions take place, you know, the family of that person that's been wrongfully convicted, you know, they suffer, and it's like dropping a pebble in a pond. It's a ripple effect, and it affects the community, it affects everybody, you know what I mean? Because you don't even realize the extent of what it does to a family, how it affects us, how it affects our daily living, how it affects our sleep, our eat, our everything. It touches us in every way that people don't even think. It touches us. Even it affects my relationship with my wife. You know what I mean? It affects everything around you. And you have to be mindful of that. You know what I mean? And realize, you know what I mean? This is something I would not wish on anybody, not even my worst enemy, and I don't claim to have any, you know what I mean? Anyway. But anyway.
I did want to add to that. I think, you know, this is probably really progressive and moving forward, and I think it's something that's really important. When you talk about how families are affected, I feel like, you know, they harm families, especially when it's a wrongful conviction on like a capital death penalty case. I feel family members, immediate family members, including siblings, parents, and children, surviving family members, need to be compensated too.
Counsel too. Counseling,
compensation.
Because this mentally does things up here that people don't even have any clue of. You know, it should be some type of counseling, something to help the family deal through the trauma that they went through. Because we are going through trauma, have been going through trauma, and still to this day
right now
going through it. This is not over. This is just the beginning of another stage of this thing. So.
Actually, that's a great segue. I wanted to ask both of you what you two do to take care of yourselves, because this is such an exhausting and draining and traumatic experience, and you're, you know, trying to keep yourselves fresh, obviously, to keep going for Rodney.
What do we do?
We need those tools. I'll speak on that. We need tools for self-care because we're not doing enough. I'll say that, you know, we need, you know, we don't know what to do sometimes, you know, healthy practices to try to mitigate the stress of what we've been going through. So.
Yeah, well, you know, and we do what we can, you know what I mean? You know, there's times we'll go out and, you know, I like to go karaoke, sing, dance, you know what I mean, get out, you know, just try to blow off some steam, you know what I mean? That's what I like to do, you know what I mean? And I like to spend a lot of time, you know, with her and my son and everything, but there's still that knife that's stuck in me that has not been yet removed, so you can't freely move about like you really want to. You can't really express yourself, and we really can't even start healing until we can remove the knife that's there, you know what I mean? So it's hard, it really is, but we've learned to deal with it and make the best of it and we pray about it, and we do all that we can do, and then we trust that God will help us do the rest. And that's the way we live from day to day.
That's where we're at. We're at
That's
right
how
now.
we live.
You had mentioned before that you got to know other families who were similarly affected. You know, how have you talked about these issues with them?
Yeah, I've discussed with other family members about the same issues that we're dealing with, that we're going, and that helps, you know, to be able to talk to somebody that you can look eye to eye and they understand exactly where you are and what you're feeling and what you're going through, and that helps and everything else, you know, to be able to talk to somebody about that. But at the end of the day, you're still lacking that professional guidance, that professional help, you know what I mean, that you really need to move on and move past this, you know. And so, but like I said, we do all that we can do, you know. We do all that we can do and trust that God will do the rest, and He has been working miracles in our lives.
So I think that's we're ready to wrap up. I want to thank everybody, you know, here in the room and in Dr. Phil's audience and in all of the advocates' Facebook feeds. And we want to encourage everybody to continue to keep Rodney's story alive in every way that they can, and to stay engaged with this case. And one of the ways you can do it, obviously you're already listening, but information can be found on the innocenceproject.org, our website, and if you look at join-Rodney Reed, and that'll be up on the feed as well. And so thanks everybody on media and everybody in the room, and thanks to Wana and Rodrick.
You know, I just like to say one other thing though. On the December 22nd, we are going to be holding an event, a celebration of life. That is my brother's birthday. We're going to be trying to have a national day of action to coincide with that on December 22nd. So everybody look for that. It's going to be a big, and I would like to also wish my mother a happy belated birthday. Her birthday was on the 2nd. I wasn't there. And my little brother, my youngest brother, should I say, because he's not little, not by no means. But my youngest brother's birthday, his is tomorrow, and I won't be there to celebrate it with them, but I want to let them know that I love them, and when I get home, we'll celebrate everybody's birthday together, and we'll do what we do.
Happy
love
birthday, y'all.
Happy
We
birthday.
love y'all.
That's it. That's a wrap. Thank y'all.